In an ideal world, you would have a team made up of only A players, correct? Of course, who wouldn't want a team made up of A players? The problem, of course, is that's usually not reality. In fact, Brad Smart of Top Grading says that about only 20 to 30% of employees are A players or high performers, which by definition means that probably 70, 80% of the people on your team are not. So what do you do with those B, C, and D players? Well, let's focus in on the B players today. And let's ask the question, is it possible to take a B player and make them into an A player? In other words, if you could take somebody on your team who's doing okay and help them become great, what would be the impact of that on your company, right? Because A players aren't just like 10 or 15% better than B players. They're multiple. So they're like 2x or 3x. So if you could take B players and turn them into A players, how much of an impact would that have on your company, especially in this tight market where it's harder and harder to find A players? So you might have to hire some B players and then turn them into A players. But that multiple is still there. So how would you go about doing that? Well, there are a lot of things that you can do from a strategic level and from a process level to be able to do that. For example, you could create some kind of intentional process that would help someone go from B to A. And it probably involve doing some kind of diagnostic and coming up with some kind of personal development plan for them. It probably involve having some kind of coach or mentor. It probably involves some level of content that you need to be able to communicate to the person. It probably involve some skill development. It probably involve giving them some challenging assignments to be able to push them outside their comfort zone. It probably requires some feedback and accountability. You could probably figure out kind of a process to do that. But none of that matters if you don't master the one thing that I want to talk to you about today. Because the one thing that we're going to talk about determines whether or not this is going to be successful or not. Because if it were easy, like everyone would be doing it. But almost every business owner and or entrepreneur fails at this one first step that you need to take. And that first step is you need to define what an A player is. Now, I know that seems simplistic, but think about it. If I were to give you a sheet of paper and give you 30 seconds, could you clearly define what an A player is? Most people can't. In fact, you'll say to somebody, well, you've got an A player. What is an A player? Well, you just know it when you see it, right? Well, a nebulous target means that you get nebulous results. Just saying, hey, you know it when you see it just doesn't work. Well, they're an A player. Well, what do you mean by an A player? Well, they are that, right? What does that thing mean? So what I want to encourage you to do today is that if you want to turn more B players into A players, you need to actually start by defining what does an A player look like. Not just for you, so you have clarity, not just for the process so you know exactly what you're trying to produce, but also for the B player. The B player needs to know what is it about A players that currently is not true of me. So it works for everybody if you have absolute clarity on what an A player looks like. Now, an A player in one industry doesn't necessarily look like an A player in another. And an A player in one department of your company may not look like an A player in another part. An A player in finance may not look like an A player in sales, which may not look like an A player in ops. So you need to define what an A player is first for your company and then also for each individual department because it might be different. In other words, you just can't intuitively say, well, everyone knows what an A player is. You need to actually define what does an A player look like. So to help you get started, I'm going to give you a couple different qualities that tend to be typical that when I ask this question will eventually come out. And so I want to give you a list of them. You can just start thinking about them. But remember, there's no one perfect list. So I'm not trying to give you the perfect list. I'm going to give you some ideas that you can think about and get you started because it's easier to have something to start with. So here are a couple ones. People often say an A player is somebody who's self-motivated or somebody who takes initiative, meaning that when you give them an assignment, that's it. They don't require a whole lot of leadership or management or direction. Like you give it to them and they just get it done. They come to work ready to get stuff done. They don't need you to pump them up. They're already self-motivated. Some people will say that an A player is somebody who's really resourceful, meaning that if they run into a problem, rather than coming immediately to you and saying, I don't know what to do, they immediately start trying to figure it out on their own. And if they come to you, it's because they've already tried a bunch of things and they haven't worked. Some people would say an A player is somebody who has a high work ethic, who's really, comes to work early, leaves late, isn't a clock watcher, etc. Some people will say an A player is somebody who's really smart. Now, that may not be true for you. You might not care, but there are plenty of companies, they say an A player is somebody who's really smart. They've got a lot of gray matter up here. Some will say that an A player is somebody who's really curious. So they ask lots of questions. They love learning. If you're working on an assignment, they're trying to figure out, hey, I ought to be on that team because now I'm going to learn something that I don't currently know. Whereas sometimes B and C players aren't going to do that. Some people will say that an A player is someone who always takes personal responsibilities and hates excuses. So you've got plenty of B players and C players who come in and say, well, I didn't get this done because of blah, blah. Whereas the A player is going to take responsibility. Listen, I committed to get that done. I didn't get it done. It's all on me. I own it. Like, they take personal responsibility for that. Some will say that an A player is somebody who always comes prepared to the meeting. So C and D players are just kind of showing up, but A players are always prepared. Even if it's a one-on-one, they come prepared. They're not like trying to find something. They have it because they've been doing it ahead of time. Some people will say that an A player is somebody who's fast. Like, they're fast on their feet, they're fast to think, they're fast to act. You give them an assignment and boom, they work on it right away. Whereas B, C players tend to wait in some period of time. Some people say that an A player, the thing that really differentiates them is that they're always producing results, or they're result oriented, because they realize that they're paid not for their time, they realize that they're paid for results. So a lot of B and C players will expand the amount of time because they're thinking, hey, I want to make sure I get paid well for this, so they expand time. Versus A players are figuring, I'm not paid for my time, I'm paid for results. In fact, I want to reduce the amount of time that it takes to get the result. That's the difference between an A and a B player. Some people say that an A player is somebody who goes above and beyond what's expected. So you give them a presentation and they don't just put together some average slides, they make the slides look amazing. Or you give them a spreadsheet they need to create, and not only do they do the assignment, but they put in some other cool automations and other things that you didn't even ask for that make it like amazing. Some people say that an A player is somebody who's really humble and who's open to critique. There's B, C players, take it as a personal affront. A players really they don't care. They want to get better. So if you got some critique, give it to me. Like, I want that. And B players and C players tend to push off on that. A players tend to be problem solvers on their own, kind of like the people who are resourceful. Some people say that A players are the people who are really highly skilled at the function that they're supposed to be doing, versus B players are just okay at it. Some people say that A players are really resilient. And so if they run into a wall, they don't give up. If something bad happens, they don't quit. They don't get moody around the office. Some people say that an A player is someone who influences other people. So when they speak, other people are paying attention to them. Some people will say that an A player is somebody who exceeds whatever the quota or whatever the metric is or whatever the goal is. So if they're supposed to produce X amount of revenue, they go above it. If they're supposed to make X number of calls, they always produce above that number. Now, I intentionally gave you, I think, 16 different items, 16 different ideas, because I don't want you to have 16. I don't want you to come up with 14 or 20 of them. I want to encourage you to come up with a list of maybe 5 to 10 items that you think differentiate A players from B players. And then I want to encourage you, if you've got a top team, to take your top team and define what's an A player, and then make sure that everybody's in agreement. Like, these are the handful of things, 5, 7, 8, 10 things that we think are really true of A players. Obviously, make sure they're all true of you. But then you want, in your top team. But then you want to be able to say, now we know this. Now we can create a process to turn some of these B players into A players, because we have absolute clarity about what that person looks like. And then when you're in those mentoring meetings, then you can actually have the conversations that are necessary, because the B player can know, this is what I need to shoot for. I'm good on these 3 things, but I'm not good on these other 5 things. We're going to work on these 5 things, because you need to shore up those weaknesses for them to go from a B to an A player. So if you want to end up turning some of the B players into A players, there are lots of things you could do on the process perspective, but really the things that differentiate A's and B's aren't usually the skill things as much as they are the qualities of the person who takes that person to every task that they're engaged in. So I hope you found this helpful. I hope you're going to make that list with you and your team. And then I encourage you, if you're listening to this by video or watching it by video or listening by podcast, you just hit the subscribe button, because my commitment to you is to give you actionable ideas and insights that will help you grow and scale a self-operating business that can double every 12 to 36 months. So until next time, to Accelerated Success, Bruce out.